Hello, and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in business and in life and simplify them. And friends, I don't know about you, but quite a few of you out there have probably been flung into working from home. Not by choice for most people, and certainly very little preparation to make it all work. So I thought, man, this is a great topic to really dive deep into and simplify, especially if you have teams that work for you and you're trying to figure out how to motivate and empower them while they work remotely. So I wanted to bring back a special guest that we've had on the podcast before, and you might recognize his voice and certainly his expertise. His name is Dr. Paul White, and he is a psychologist, a speaker, a consultant, and an author whose passion is making work relationships work. Now, over 20 years of experiences, he has certainly assisted businesses, government agencies, schools, and nonprofit agencies to improve their staff morale and create positive work environments. He also knows how to reduce the sarcasm or cynicism or any negativity you might have associated with a toxic work environment. But more importantly, he has learned how to master the craft and helping others learn how to communicate individualized, authentic appreciation among team members. And that's the secret. So I'd like to welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, Dr. Paul White. Hey, Dr. Paul.
Hi, Mary. Thanks for having me back.
I'm so glad you're here. And for anyone that had listened to the last episode, by the way, it's episode 56. And that's where you laid out how to incorporate the 5 love languages in the workplace, which lots of people who listen to this podcast are well familiar with the 5 love languages by Dr. Gary Chapman. Now, the 5 love languages, when it gets translated to the workplace, is the 5 languages of appreciation, right? Run me through that really, really quick, what the 5 are. So if anybody hadn't heard the last episode, they can be on the same page.
Sure. They're actually the same name as the 5 love languages, but look differently in application. They're words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, tangible gifts, and yes, even physical touch. And that's going to be an interesting one as we work through this remote working environment. But those are the 5. And what we found is that really words of affirmation, we've had over 240,000 people take our online assessment, and that's the primary language. It's less than half, so you still have to consider the others, but about 45% of the workforce do value words, and so that's a good place to start.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So you have this other book, and it's called The Vibrant Workplace. And again, all the links and everything that we talk about in this episode will stick in the show notes for people. You can find those at thesimplifierspodcast.com. And what I really liked about reading through The Vibrant Workplace, first off, it applies to any size team, whether it's a big, massive corporation with loads of departments all over the world or a teeny tiny micro business that has maybe 4 or 5 people. And do you mind if I read a little bit from the book?
That'd be great.
So I want to just take right straight from the top of the book in the introduction. Page 9, you say this: can a workplace actually be vibrant? Busy, yes. Sometimes fun, but vibrant, really? That's exactly the point. It's something that we all long for if we think about it. The vibrant workplace connotes energy, positivity, and growth, characteristics that we desire for the environment where we spend the majority of our waking hours. Isn't that true? A vibrant workplace draws people to it, quality, talented employees who want to work in a healthy context and become part of a life-exuding process. Employees bring their own gifts and unique personalities to add to the synergy in a dynamic work setting. A vibrant workplace is the antithesis of how many work environments are described negative, energy sapping, and toxic to growth. How many of us have over the years before we started a business, or maybe where they're at currently, have been in a toxic work environment? There's nothing worse, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's pretty sapping of life energy, no doubt about that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times the ones that I've been part of, it happens so slowly and so subtly that all of a sudden you're just wrapped in it and you don't know how to fix it. Whether you're the manager or you're the employee reporting to somebody else, you're just like, well, it can't get any better than this, so we're just going to have to deal, right?
Right. Yeah. It's an image comes to mind of sort of working in a place and slowly the water is rising, right? And you sort of notice, oh wow, it's a little higher than it was the other day, but you don't worry about it until you can't move, you can't breathe. It really becomes suffocating.
Yeah. And so you wrote this book a couple of years ago, and it is excellent because at the end of every chapter, there's great little assessments and questions that help you quickly get information on whatever specific area that you're struggling with when it comes to managing your teams or, again, creating that vibrant workplace. I highly recommend it. But here we are in 2020. We're recording this one on April 27th, to be exact, and we are in the middle of a pandemic. For quite a few workers out there, they've been working from home for at least 5 or 6 weeks now, flung into it with very little preparation. Now, that changes the whole game. And I know that you and your team have done quite a bit of new data research to really understand these types of remote workers because let's face it, this is not normal remote working at all either, right?
Right.
So
Correct.
Tell me a little bit of what you've found so far that's been pretty surprising.
Well, let me first lay a little bit of groundwork. 2 years ago, we did research comparing remote workers at that point in time, which they mainly had chosen to do so, versus on-site employees and how they differed in how they wanted to be shown appreciation. Found some interesting things. Words was still number one for the remote employees, but quality time picked up quite a bit to where they were almost equal. And you think, well, how can you do quality time, remotely? Which is one of the interesting and important factors. We found you really have to be proactive in showing appreciation remotely because you don't have those chance encounters where you're walking by somebody's office and you stop and check in, or you see them in the break room or coming in, from lunch or in the morning. And so if you just don't have those remotely where you sort of show up on somebody's screen or whatever, and so you really have to sort of be intentional about it. Secondly, we know that it's true for more and more younger employees that they're less connected or feel less connected to their supervisor and manager and more connected to their peers and colleagues. And so you want to encourage communication among peers, not just that you as the supervisor, manager, owner, whatever, are doing it, and maybe even set it up. One of the things that's been going on, just getting examples from people online, or virtual coffee breaks or virtual happy hour time to talk. And that's probably the third point, that it needs to be personal, because we really believe that appreciation is about the value of the person. It includes productivity and getting things done, but we're people first and have value. And if you only talk about the project, the tasks, whatever's gotten done, it sort of denigrates down to they're just a producer, they're just a worker, right? And you have to be intentional about that as well, because most remote communication is sort of scheduled. We've got a conference, we've got a call, whatever. And if you don't sort of allow time either before, maybe during, or even after for people to chat and sort of check in and see how they're doing, what's going on with their kids, because those are the kind of conversations you have in the break room, right? Typically. But if you don't sort of allow for that, it feels very sort of just cold and objective. And the other part, and this is not really new news now, but at that point, it was important to know that people that work remotely want to connect by video, at least occasionally. Not all the time necessarily, as we're finding out, because it can be tiresome, but not just emails, not just text, not just phone calls. And so, and even for a team meeting, where we now have the capability of doing that's important to include. So that's sort of the foundation. And if you don't do those, all the rest of this sort of doesn't matter. But you got to be proactive. And I would say be proactive and be personal. And a tip about that is that lots of times we will sort of enter into some questions, and it almost turns into an interrogation. Well, how's your wife? How are your kids? Whatever. It's really helpful to share some personally. I mean, if we're building a relationship, it's got to go two ways. And so people will respond when you share a little bit, what we did this weekend, and we grilled out and, had games on the yard or whatever, then they were more likely to respond.
Yeah. And, I think it's really interesting. I've been working from home for the last couple of years. The whole team at the Simplifiers, we actually went fully remote, and we've got people in 3 different countries now. So we're fully remote for about 2 years ago or so. So for us, we're like, well, okay, we've already got the teams and systems and tools in place. Like that part didn't change. The other part that changed was certainly that now I'm homeschooling on top of all things. But,
Exactly.
We're all in the same bucket in the boat together, right? But what I think is really interesting, talking to friends who and clients who are just not used to working remotely, is that there are 2 different types of people from what I found. And I'm curious if your data shows this as well. There are people who don't mind being on video and people who absolutely hate it. And the people that hate it feel either self-conscious about how they look in this rectangular, does the background look all right? Do I have all the clutter kind of hidden away? But then they also feel like there's just a sense of performativeness. Like I have to show up in a certain way and put on a show for others that are either in the meeting or otherwise. Do you get any sense of that from the data that you guys have seen so far, of like the tool that actually needs to connect people are so against and really struggle with?
Not so much from our own data, but I did some reading this week and found out that, we do find that talking on video conference is more tiresome.
Yeah.
And part of it is that people don't like looking at themselves talking, and they're having to process that. So that's more data you're having to take in and process.
Right.
As well as that they don't, sort of the social graces around it and the technology, the pauses and so forth are different.
Yeah.
And we really haven't learned how to sort of wait and then enter in, or what do you do if 2 people talk at the same time? And so that takes energy as well. So there is that sort of performance thing and sort of a lack of social graces around it that we're still sort of developing it or teaching. So that's clearly there.
Well, yeah, that is huge. And, a little secret from me to anybody who's listening, if you are exactly that person, you don't really like seeing yourself on the screen, just minimize your video camera so that you don't actually see yourself. Even in my conversation with Dr. Paul right now, we're doing this remotely using Skype as the tool. I only see his face right in the center, and I'm looking, dead into my webcam. And that helps. That certainly helps me. But yes, there has been quite a few articles out about Zoom exhaustion. And I think you're right. Whereas, maybe 2 months ago, we would be meeting in a conference room and people would be interrupting and talking over each other. And that's just how your team works. It really takes dedication and waiting your turn and keen listening skills to get work done now.
Yeah. And what we have found, let me share a little bit about what we've just found, and just was analyzing the data this weekend and this morning, is that in comparing newly remote employees, which are different than people who've been doing it for a while,
Totally.
they're different in that they're forced to do it, right? It wasn't their choice.
Yeah.
Secondly, it's not just remote, it's working from home for almost everybody, which creates technological challenges, organizational challenges, dealing with families, pets, and all that kind of thing. And they're also, they're the broader context of health concerns, financial concerns. So there's a lot more stress in the milieu around us as well. So it's not just, okay, now I'm working remotely. It's all these other factors.
Yeah.
And what we found is that newly remote employees are having a harder time staying connected or feeling connected than people who have been working remotely for a while. That's one issue. But, psychologists often are sort of, we master the obvious. And our research is sort of confirming what we know are good things to do. We found that people who get adequate sleep, eat healthily, are proactive in reaching out to others, take breaks and do something rejuvenating occasionally, like a hobby or whatever, that they're managing stress better than those that don't. They have a more positive outlook and perspective on what's going on, and they're also more productive.
Yeah.
And the one variable I forgot to mention is that they don't binge watch the news. That's the singular greatest factor to raise your anxiety that we found is you spend a lot of time watching the news. It really jacks you up that way. So, it's not rocket science, but it's sort of confirming. And what's interesting for managers and supervisors and employers is that it doesn't take a lot to encourage and show appreciation to your team. And let me just explain that real quick, because I use those terms a little bit interchangeably. Most of our work is about appreciation, showing appreciation for what people have done, who they are. Encouragement is largely the same kind of action, except the time frame is different. Appreciation is really about the past, and encouragement is about the present and the future. And so you're coming alongside using the same actions, but to encourage them to hang in there and keep going. And so we found that to do that, our work with appreciation found that you need to use the language that's most important to them, whether it's words or time and acts of service. It needs to be about them personally versus just sort of a group thing. Way to go, team. We met our goals for the quarter.
Right.
Needs to be viewed as authentic. That there's a sense of that. And in the Vibrant Workplace, we talk about the challenges in. One of them is, people that are tougher to appreciate, or at least that you don't connect well with. And we really encourage people not to just sort of blow through it and try to fake it, because that does not go well. It sort of undermines the trust that you may have there.
Yeah. And, even if you have a small team or you work in a large corporation with many, many departments, we've all been there where there's been an employee recognition program or some sort of award ceremony, and it feels very... I don't know, it just feels a little bit inauthentic. It's just a certificate and a free donut in the break room. And really, is there any appreciation in that? What would you say in this day and age? Eventually people are going to come back working into the workplace, whether that's, next month or next year. What would you give as advice for those that are looking to kind of, improve their antiquated employee recognition programs?
Yeah, so we actually believe that employee recognition, when it's designed well and implemented consistently, does a good thing. It's mainly about productivity, and that's what it's designed for, and that can work well. But we encourage people to also have an appreciation focus, and we've developed an online train the trainer program that's inexpensive, and then codes for people to be able to take and find out what the language and actions are of your team members. And what we found is that if you use the language and actions that's important to a person, it doesn't take much, right? It's sort of like hitting the target, and you don't have to hit it, every time or shoot a whole bunch. But if you're shooting shotgun and sort of hoping it lands, then you're wasting a lot of time and energy. So part of our process is to help people be effective and be able to get the job done with, not a lot of wasted time and energy.
Yeah. My love language is words of affirmation. So my appreciation language would be the same. And I know that I love getting a handwritten letter in the mail. It really, I have ones from my clients that have been sitting on my desk for years, but it's what's critically important, and I learned this from you and Dr. Gary Chapman, is what you believe your love language or appreciation language is isn't necessarily what your staff's is as well. So you might be pushing out all the handwritten letters in the world, and they just really want you to, take them for a cup of coffee and have some quality time together, or, something else that really, like an acts of service of helping them simplify the process the tasks that are on their plate. So I think that's a critical one. It's such an obvious, aha, but it also is such a profound one too.
Well, and I find that really the skill I call perspective taking, being able to see a situation from another person's point of view is a weakness we have in our culture.
Yeah.
And actually for a lot of business leaders, they get it for a certain group, but they don't connect with everybody lots of times, and they have to work at it. But interestingly, your comment about your personal love language and language of appreciation, did some research, and we found about 2/3 of the time your primary language in the workplace is the same or one of the top two of your personal one and vice versa. So it's not always a one-for-one sort of exchange, but usually it's in the ballpark. Obviously, physical touch differs quite a bit between personal and workplace relationships.
Yeah. So we talked last time about some common obstacles that managers tend to create with their teams, whether they know it or are doing it subconsciously. Talk to us about those obstacles.
So one of them and the one that's most mentioned by employees is the sense that people are too busy to show appreciation. And I understand that. We are all busy. We have a lot to do. And so we've created our resources so that we're not creating another to-do list for you. I mean, we want to help you do this, but do it either what you're doing or almost doing and hit the mark. And so part of that has to do with understanding that if you actually communicate appreciation in the way that's meaningful to another person, it sort of lasts for a while. And also all the negative things that we know come with people not feeling valued sort of drop away. And those are time suckers, really, in the sense of people showing up late, calling in and not, showing up at all.
Right.
Conflict over stupid little things like, the size of their monitor or if they've got a window or whatever it might be.
Right.
And also just staff turnover reduces when team members feel valued, and other things like employee theft and amazing kinds of things that can take a manager's time and energy you have to deal with. If you think about your daily life without having to deal with those, you've got more time and energy to deal with really the task and mission of your organization.
Yeah.
So the busyness goes away. And we found, like, for example, people say quality time. I don't have time to spend time with people. First of all, I always tell managers, just because a team member has quality time as their language doesn't mean they want time with you. You may be great and wonderful, but lots of times they want to spend time with their peers. But the other part, I had a CFO, she said, my language is quality time. But all I want is somebody to stop in and check in, see how I'm doing. And after 5 minutes, I'm booting them because I got too much to do. So it doesn't take a lot of time and effort, but it does in the sense of thinking about and learning what's important to them and then get it done.
And like you said at the beginning of the conversation, people are not robots. We're humans. Like, it takes that 3 seconds of, hey, how was your weekend? And genuinely mean it in asking the question. One thing that always drove me crazy when I first moved to England is that a common greeting here is to say, "Oh, is you all right?" And I, as a Texan, I would say, "Oh, well, yeah, I'm okay." No, people just generally don't actually expect you to respond. They just say, "Oh, yeah, it's all right. It's all right." Yeah. But no, I think it is taking that moment and saying, "No, actually, are you all right? How's things going?" Right. And I imagine that translates to now working remotely and maybe homeschooling. How's it going? How is that going? What exactly. Support do you need, or just do you want to vent a little and have an open ear?
Yeah, and on the remote employee and workforce, what I find is that if you send somebody a text or an email and say, "Hey, I'd like to chat and check in for 5 or 10 minutes, see how you're doing," when would be a good time for you? Because that's part of the dilemma is you don't know what they're doing. You don't want to interrupt them. So just take one extra step, check and say, "Hey, I'd like to just chat, nothing major."
Yeah.
When would be a good time? They'll let you know, and then you do it. And then it goes well, unless, the kid's crying or the dog's barking or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's interesting that we're becoming a little bit, in this situation at least, we're becoming a little more forgiving about those kinds of things where if you were just working remotely in the past, it wasn't acceptable to have your cat walk across your screen and so forth.
And I think that is a silver lining of all this is, having to be all flung into the same situation at the same time certainly gives people a bit more empathy and a lot more grace. What my hope is that in the months or years to come, corporations and small businesses are going to go, well, do we really need everybody at the office all at the same time? Or
exactly.
Could this be a place where we can reduce costs a little, have it a little bit more flexible, and be a bit more realistic for working parents who are trying to juggle both at the same time?
Absolutely. One of the main findings and sort of most impactful to me was we asked, what do you like about working from home?
Mm-hmm.
And number one, over 50% said, I like having more time because I don't have to commute, half hour, 2 hours every day.
Yeah.
And related to that specifically was more time with family.
Yep.
So I think that is going to be a driving force to sort of that hybrid model of people working a day or two a week from home and having that extra time. Because people really, really do highly value that.
You know what's funny? This is what's working in our household. I have two kids. They're ages 9 and 11 at the time of this recording. And yes, I used to commute a lot before I started working from home. But one thing that we've actually done, which is just great fun, is we've replaced the commute and we're taking morning walks. And so we go for a walk, all of us, and, 10-15 minute walk around the neighborhood and then come back. And then we're like, okay, we're at school now. So let's start homeschool. And it still gives that feeling, and it gives the family a little bit of quality time and a little bit of exercise as well.
Sure.
So I think that if you are missing your commute or your moment to kind of clear your head or listen to a podcast if you're by yourself, then go for it. But, remember that this added extra time actually improves your life, that you're not being stuck in traffic and in all the stress that comes with that as well. Are there any other common obstacles that managers tend to create to keep in mind?
Well, I think the one related to busyness is that often, and it's not solely managers, other people do it as well, but they create artificial stress by closing a time frame of when they want something done. And they say, you need it, let's say Monday, and you say, I need it Friday, time is a resource, and stress is the, relationship between resources and demands. And if you decrease a resource, the stress goes up.
Yeah.
And so I really encourage people, and this is how I communicate with people. I say, okay, what's your drop dead date? I will meet that. No doubt. I've never missed a drop dead date. But by when do you really want it? And I'll shoot for that. I won't guarantee it, but I'm going to shoot for that, because sometimes, we like margin and all that. And it's also a way to build trust, because lots of times we give those artificial time frames and move it up because we're not sure they're going to get it done. Say, if you can get it to me by Friday, that'd be super. But, first thing Monday morning works as well. So not squeezing the time by when you want something artificially really can help out.
Well, and here's what I think is also really interesting, Dr. Paul, at least for me, is as we said earlier, video call exhaustion is a real thing, and we're doing more and more video calls crammed into our day than we've ever done before. However, we're becoming more effective at meeting, because what would have been normally a 1-hour meeting is now turned into a 30-minute video call, because we're getting through it faster. But then also, I believe that if you have a good routine at home and you've gotten into a rhythm, whether you are homeschooling or not, or creating boundaries on this is my workspace at home and this is my, non-workspace and all the things, you start to get into a rhythm. I find I'm completing tasks faster than I was before. And so you may actually, and this actually relates back to another conversation I had, Trevor Blake, you may actually find that you don't have to work a full 8 hours to get all the things done. And so I think that requires, if you're a business owner or a manager, to also rethink, do we have to clock in and clock out, or could we, measure success by the actual tasks that are accomplished rather than the time spent on the clock? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think homeschooling is actually a great analogy and example of that. My wife and I, we have 4 adult kids now, but we homeschooled them early on.
Yeah.
And most homeschooling families that are sort of dedicated to that and choose to do it versus it being forced on you, find that you can get through more material in a more effective way in less time. And you're done by noon or 1 o'clock. And so because it's focused, you're able to transition well, take breaks that help you be more effective. And so I think that's true. Now, there are some people that struggle with that because of the transitions or the distractions. They have to learn how to manage those. I mean, I was talking to a friend that said they're having a hard time. If they take a little bit of a break, it's hard for them to get back onto it. So you got to figure out that process, and also deal with distractions, especially with kids in the home. I think it's unrealistic to expect a 9 and 11-year-old go through the whole even morning without interrupting you, right?
Yeah.
And so setting sort of realistic expectations and say, look, I'm got a call here, a video call from 9 to 10. So need you to not interrupt me then. But after that, we can chat and touch base and so forth.
Yeah.
And setting those kinds of, opportunities to intersect can make that part go well. Because I just find that some people just don't want to have any interruptions at all ever. Well, I don't think that's realistic. It's not going to happen.
Absolutely. And I think that for me, at least, navigating all this, I think that you can try to do two things at the same time, but you're kind of going to do both mediocre.
Right,
so
right.
I find that even just putting the boundaries on my own work day, so from these hours to these hours, I'm 100% all in homeschooling. And when I'm doing these hours to these hours, I'm 100% all in doing work or podcasting or coaching or whatever. And when I try to blend or bleed both of them simultaneously, it never works out for anybody.
Right.
And I can't even imagine if I had children that were, say, 3 or 4 years old. It would just be a whole other ballgame.
Yeah.
So you had touched on it very early on. I want to make sure we talk about it. So let's say we have a toxic work environment, or you have an employee or a boss who you don't appreciate. Mm-hmm. What do you do there? How do you work with someone you don't actually appreciate?
So first, like I said, is don't try to fake it, because that won't go well. But secondly, what we found and what I found, because early on, I've been doing this part about 10 years, and I was like, okay, well, you sort of got to just learn to appreciate them. But just gutting it out really doesn't work.
No.
Like, I don't know what Bob does, and I don't really like him, but I'm going to appreciate him. It just doesn't go. But what we found is if you, first of all, make sure you know what they do and what they do well. But secondly, I think at an easier level in some ways is get to know them a little bit as a person and spend some time, whether that's, via video or going out for coffee or whatever it might be, and just find out about them, because then I find that typically people have some touch points in their life, whether that's they've lived at the same, state or done different things or, had twins or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And then you have a better sense of who they are, and you can value them for something about them. And you'll understand also, the reason they're running late is because they've got 3 kids under 5,
Right.
and they're having to manage that. So it does create a bit of a sense of empathy and grace. And so I think getting to know one another, it doesn't have to be super deep, sort of a psychological interview. It's just find out about their life and share some about yours. And that really is a very simple, easy step that really makes things go better.
I think that's such great advice. And I have worked with some unique people over the years. I'm thinking about jobs that I've worked at prior to starting the Simplifiers way back when. Whew, I mean, it takes a lot of grace, a lot of grace and a lot of patience with some of those people. But is there ways that we can either neutralize the negativity or, have
Absolutely.
some way to approach conflict? What do you recommend?
Yeah, negativity, when it becomes sort of an existing part of the culture, can really be deadly. And people just do not like going to work. And there's pretty simple 2 things you can do. One is don't contribute to the negativity. If a couple of people are complaining or grumbling, don't add in. Either be quiet or just say, hey, I'll catch you all later, and you excuse yourself. So you're not sort of adding fuel to the fire, right? The second one is just to make either a positive comment or call attention to something positive. It doesn't have to be about them as a person, appreciation, but just say, man, I'm loving the spring daffodils, and I've got some tulips that came up, because positivity sort of throws water on that flame of negativity, and it just sort of douses it. And it may not put it out totally, but if you do those 2 things consistently, and then if you engage, a friend or a colleague in sort of that effort, you start to win some beachheads, and it starts to change.
And, I will point back to what you said at the top of the conversation was, especially if you're still working remotely, there is such power in setting up either, online come together for a drink at the end of the week, or I've seen some people doing like online pub quizzes with their teams, and just something to blow off a little bit of steam. And it doesn't have to be mandatory, but it is just another way for people, again, to remember the humanness of everything.
One group, but one group shared that they just had people wear sort of funny or silly hats from some aspect of their past during a video call, just at the beginning, and just say, okay, well, that's interesting.
You're learning a bit more. I do have to chuckle about there's an enterprising company in Silicon Valley who had come out with, have you heard about this, Dr. Paul? It's genius, called Goat to Meeting, where you can actually rent a goat or a llama to show up at your next video conference call. And it's, a farm out in Silicon Valley. So, there are little ways to break the monotony, break the stress, bring a little bit of levity to the work that we do. And maybe some of that will start to let some light seep into what could be a toxic workplace relationship or otherwise.
Sure.
So I know in the book you talk about recognition. There's a connection between recognition and appreciation and performance. But I also really get the sense that, especially in America, there is some unnecessary chronic busyness that plagues a lot of teams. Can you speak to that and what your hope is coming out of the pandemic and all things?
Well, when we go through a stressful time or a time of perceived crisis, that things are difficult, the things that really matter float to the top and sort of filter through. And the other things that we've been doing and thought really mattered, it could be, I don't want to downplay marketing, but, going to different marketing meetings, and sort of networking with people. Yeah, you need to do some of that, but do you need to go to every one that happens every 2 weeks or whatever, and sort of filter through those and help prioritize. One of the interesting things, I used to help family-owned businesses deal with mission, vision statements, and so forth. I quit doing it because it was just a waste of time because they didn't use them. But a vision and mission statement, along with values, should help you filter and prioritize. It helps you make decisions. Should we do this? Yeah. And I think this kind of time helps us as well. You asked earlier just, what are some basic things can do? For people around this time, and generally speaking, I find that a lot of business leaders, they want to do things well, but then they sort of make it bigger and more complex than what it needs to be, right? And so on the issue of encouraging and showing appreciation, I just say start somewhere with someone. Yeah. And it's really helpful and important to find out what is meaningful to them. And so we created this online assessment. And as we discussed before, I'm willing to share with your listeners a code to take that. It's a $25 code, and so I'll give that to you. And I'll give you the one for remote employees because it's sort of easy to generalize back to the regular workplace, but to go from, well, how do you spend quality time or do acts of service remotely? Yeah. So, if people just email me at yes.drpaul@gmail, I'll send them a code for that. And that's just for you, but it'll give you a sense of what it gives you. And then you can buy that for your team. And we have sort of team charts that you can do and all that to be able to identify specifically what's important to that person. So you don't waste time doing things that they don't want, because some people don't want to spend time. And they're like, I wish they quit bugging me, or words don't mean something or much to some people as well.
And that is so generous, because I think that if you don't know where to begin, that is a great place to take the online assessment. So again, I'll put all this in the show notes for everybody at the simplifierspodcast.com, but you can email Dr. Paul at yesdrpaul@gmail.com, put in the subject line simple, and he'll send you over a free code so you can take that online assessment. And I'm telling you, this will help you start to break a little light into what is a very tricky situation, not only for the boss and the manager figuring out how to, mentor and empower and motivate their teams, but also the remote worker who's just like, I don't even know, I'm rudderless without human contact. So this is big and scary. So we want to remind everybody, the book is called The Vibrant Workplace, Overcoming the Obstacles to Build a Culture of Appreciation. And you can find that anywhere online where you buy books. And eventually when you get back out to bookstores, you can buy it there too. And also his website, which is appreciationatwork.com. That's where you can find loads of tools and assessments and all sorts of things online as well. And just a final little note on busyness. I think that you're spot on there. I think that there is a sense of chronic busyness, and I dare say it kind of feeds itself, because if we have employee recognition programs that are built on productivity and performance, and then a team that's going, well, I'm trying to hit the marks and fill my sticker chart, then there is this sense of, well, if I just look like I'm busy and I just do loads of tasks, then that will surely get the appreciation I want. And it's a cyclical, never-ending cycle. So
right. And the problem with recognition as well is that performance-based recognition only hits the top 10 or 15% of a workforce, and it's sort of the same people. So you have about 50 to 60% of the people in the middle that are good people. They're working well, they're doing their best, and they don't ever hear anything because they're never recognized for being the star. Right. And we know that 79% of the people who leave a job cite a lack of appreciation as one of the main reasons that they leave. And so if you have good people you don't want to lose, you need to focus on appreciation. And maybe in lieu of recognition, depends on your culture and what you want to do. But it's critical for those people in the middle that really are sort of our main team members that we build on. And if we lose those, it's tough to keep a business going well.
Yeah. So again, check out the book. It's online. All the links are there as well. So Dr. Paul, I have a few questions as we wrap up that I'd like to ask you. First off, what's one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system right now?
Well, I've been in the process of reading the 6-volume set of biography of Abraham Lincoln by Carl Sandburg. And I got it from my daughter and son-in-law. They found it in their attic. And it's amazing. I mean, and it's so detailed. It's sort of too detailed. But what's interesting to me about Lincoln was he knew what was important and he stuck to it, even though he really wasn't that popular while he was president. He got a lot of negative feedback, a lot of criticism. He wasn't a good-looking, smooth communicator. He was, from their point of view, from the backwoods of Illinois, being a single lawyer. But just his clear sense of who he was, what's important to him, and important to serve the country, and staying committed to that in light of lots of, negative feedback.
I love putting in a memoir or a biography every now and again because, if you are like me, you probably read a lot of business books, but it is nice because, lo and behold, history repeats itself. And when we can learn from those thought leaders and change makers, we can learn a lot to save ourselves a lot of grief in the future, I bet.
Yeah.
We'll link up that book so people can check that out. So tell us, who is one person in your network, somebody you know personally, you just feel is up to brilliant things right now? Let's shine a light on them, and who knows, maybe one day we'll have them on the podcast as well.
Sure. There's a guy, John Ruhlin, Ruhlin, dynamic guy, and has written a book and has sort of a service around giftology. And basically, he's shown the light on how stupid gifts have been used in the world of work and business, that they become meaningless because, you just sort of give it, especially at Christmas and holidays. And but he really shows the value and importance of giving meaningful gifts, significant gifts, personal gifts, from person to person. And so it's not like from my business to your team or whatever. It's from me to you or vice versa. And fascinating guy, challenging. And it fits in with our concept of tangible gifts. He really talks about, giving high-end stuff, top quality, which is true but also I think the personal aspect. And for us, it's sort of like, if you get somebody a cup of coffee, make sure you get them what they like, right?
Yeah.
And or if you order in pizza for the team, make sure you order the kinds that people like. And so he's a good guy, and he would be great on your podcast if you haven't had him.
So I have had John on the podcast before, and he is brilliant. You're absolutely right. But you know what? It sparked an idea in me is that it's probably time to get him back on the podcast, because I bet he has some valuable insight now that we're all separated and working from home, and how gift giving can change with that dynamic. So great recommendation there. So tell me, I believe that gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for today?
It's an interesting dynamic of working from home that I'm at home with my wife. Our kids are all gone. And her love language is time. And so I've sort of been thrown into this cool opportunity to spend more time with her. And she is so warm and loving back towards me. It's just been a lot of fun. And it's sort of like, wow, this is cool. I need to keep this going, and so I'm really thankful for her and just her responsiveness and support. So she's a great woman. We've been married 40 years, largely out of her patience and grace with me, but I'm thankful for her. Yeah.
There are quite a few silver linings in all of this, which can feel very dark and scary for a lot of us. But, when you hold on to those moments, and when we look back in the history books years and years from now, I hope that those moments also get documented as much as the sadness or the devastation. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So people can find you on Twitter at Dr. Paul White, or Facebook, Appreciation at Work. We'll put all those links in the show notes as well. And again, I highly recommend checking out the book, The Vibrant Workplace. It goes hand in hand with the 5 appreciations in the workplace as well. Both of those books are excellent for any team, any size. I highly recommend. So, Dr. Paul, my last question for you is this, and thank you again for sharing this new research. It's really great to hear it. Someone somewhere is listening to this episode right now. They're thinking about how in the world to get their team, who feels very disjointed and very broken right now, back into a working rhythm once again. Everybody's working remotely, working from home, juggling all the things. What's one thing you could whisper into her ear right now just to encourage her in this moment?
I would say that let your people know your desire, that you really haven't been doing what you think you should or could be, and that you'd like their help in improving it. I think sort of starting new things, is good, but to let people know, I really want this to happen. I don't think I've been doing as good a job as I need to be. But not only that, I need your help to make it happen. And will you work with me? I think that could be a good step.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder. You don't have to figure it all out by yourself. And also maybe a little bit of prayer, take it up to a higher power might actually help as well. Thank you, Dr. Paul. It's so good to chat with you again.
You bet, Mary. Thanks so much for having me.